Beloved, there is a profound truth that can transform your entire existence, a spiritual principle so powerful that when you truly understand it and apply it, everything in your life begins to shift. Before you rush into the chaos of this day, before you check your phone or dive into your endless to-do list, I want you to stop for just a moment and listen to what I'm about to share with you. You see, most people wake up and immediately surrender their peace to the demands of the world. They open their eyes, and instantly their mind races with worry, anxiety floods their heart, and they feel overwhelmed before their feet even touch the floor. But what if I told you there's a different way? What if I told you that there's one prayer, one simple yet profound practice that can shift everything in your life? My name is Pastor David, and over the past 20 years of ministry, I've witnessed countless lives transformed by this single truth. I've seen marriages restored, businesses blessed, families healed, and hearts set free, all because someone discovered the power of this one principle. And today, I want to share it with you. But before we dive deep into this life-changing revelation, let me ask you something. How many times have you tried to fix your problems in your own strength? How many sleepless nights have you spent wrestling with circumstances that seem beyond your control? How often have you felt like you're fighting battles you were never meant to fight alone? Friend, I've been there. I remember seasons in my own life when I would wake up with that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. That overwhelming sense that I had to carry the burdens of the world on my shoulders. I would rush through my morning routine, grab my coffee, and charge into the day like a warrior heading into battle. But I was fighting with broken weapons and wearing armor full of holes. Then something changed. Actually, everything changed. And it all started with understanding this one prayer that I'm about to share with you. This isn't just another spiritual technique or religious ritual. This is a divine strategy that aligns your heart with heaven's agenda before earth's chaos can steal your peace. You know, there's something fascinating about the way most people approach their day. They'll spend 30 minutes scrolling through social media, filling their minds with everyone else's highlight reels and problems. They'll check the news and absorb all the negativity and fear that the media wants to feed them. They'll dive into their work emails and immediately feel the pressure of deadlines and demands. But they won't spend 5 minutes connecting with the one who holds their very breath in his hands. Think about it. If you knew that spending just a few minutes each morning could protect your peace, guide your decisions, open doors of opportunity, and surround you with divine favor, wouldn't you make that a priority? If you discovered that there was a way to start each day from a position of victory rather than defeat, wouldn't you want to know what that looks like? Here's what I've learned through years of walking with God and counseling thousands of people. The battle for your day is won or lost in the first few minutes after you wake up. The enemy of your soul knows this, which is why he attacks your mind the moment consciousness returns. He floods your thoughts with worry before you even open your eyes. He whispers lies about your inadequacy before you take your first breath. He tries to convince you that you're alone in your struggles before you even remember that you serve the God of the impossible. But when you understand the power of this one prayer, when you make it your first response instead of your last resort, everything shifts. Your perspective changes, your priorities align, your peace returns, your strength is renewed. And you walk through your day not as someone trying to survive the storm, but as someone who knows the one who commands the winds and the waves. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Pastor, I've tried prayer before. I've asked God for help. I've read my Bible, but nothing seems to change. And I hear you, but what I'm about to share with you isn't just about praying. It's about understanding the divine order that God has established for victorious living. It's about positioning yourself to receive everything you need before you step into anything you'll face. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning not with anxiety, but with anticipation. Picture starting your day not from a place of lack, but from a position of abundance. Envision walking through your challenges not in fear, but in faith, knowing that you're covered, protected, and divinely guided. This isn't wishful thinking, beloved. This is the reality that becomes available when you discover the power of always praying first. You see, there's a reason why Jesus, even though he was the Son of God, made it his practice to rise early and spend time with the Father. Mark chapter 1, verse 35 tells us that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Think about this. The sinless Son of God, who had perfect communion with the Father, still understood the necessity of seeking God first before facing the demands of the day. If Jesus needed this time of connection, of alignment, of receiving strength and direction from heaven, how much more do we need it? If the one who never struggled with doubt or fear still prioritized prayer before ministry, what makes us think we can handle our challenges without divine guidance? But here's where it gets even more powerful. This isn't just about personal transformation, though that will absolutely happen. When you begin to live this way, when you make this one prayer your daily practice, you become a conduit of God's power and presence in the earth. Your family notices the change. Your co-workers see the difference. Your community experiences the overflow of heaven's blessing through your life. I remember Sarah, a single mother who came to me completely overwhelmed. She was working 2 jobs, raising 3 children, and felt like she was drowning in responsibility. Every morning was a battle just to get everyone dressed and out the door. She was exhausted, frustrated, and ready to give up. But when she learned this principle, when she started implementing this one prayer into her morning routine, everything began to shift. Within weeks, she was getting job opportunities she never expected. Her children became more cooperative. Her finances started stabilizing. Her health improved. Her relationships grew stronger. And it all began with those first few minutes each morning when she chose to seek God first before seeking anything else. Or consider Marcus, a businessman who was on the verge of bankruptcy. His company was failing, his marriage was struggling, and he felt like everything he touched turned to dust. But when he discovered the power of this prayer, when he started aligning his day with heaven's agenda instead of just his own plans, miraculous things began to happen. Contracts came through that saved his business. His relationship with his wife was restored, his health was renewed, and he became a testimony of God's faithfulness to everyone around him. These aren't isolated incidents, friends. This is the pattern I've seen over and over again when people understand and apply this life-changing truth. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't matter where you're starting from. It doesn't matter how broken your situation looks. It doesn't matter how many times you've tried and failed before. God's mercies are new every morning, and his power is made perfect in our weakness. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is this prayer? What are the specific words I need to say? And I'm going to share all of that with you. But first, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't about magic words or perfect formulas. This is about the posture of your heart. This is about recognizing your dependence on God and positioning yourself to receive his guidance, protection, and blessing before you face whatever this day holds. The prayer I'm about to teach you has 3 essential components. And when you understand each part, when you make them a daily practice, your life will never be the same. These aren't just religious concepts or theological ideas. These are practical, powerful principles that will transform how you think, how you feel, how you respond to challenges, and how you walk in victory. But before we dive into those 3 components, I want to address something that might be holding you back. Maybe you're thinking, I don't have time for this. My mornings are already crazy. I can barely get everyone ready and out the door as it is. Or perhaps you're saying, I'm not good with words. I don't know how to pray like other people. I feel awkward talking to God. Listen to me carefully. God isn't looking for eloquent speeches or lengthy dissertations. He's looking for a heart that turns toward him. He's looking for someone who says, "Lord, I need you more than I need my next breath. I can't do this without you. I'm placing this day in your hands." That's it. That's where it starts. And as for time, I'm not asking you to add hours to your morning routine. What I'm sharing with you can be done in just a few minutes, but those few minutes will be the most important minutes of your entire day. They will set the tone for everything that follows. They will create a spiritual atmosphere where God's blessing can flow and His protection can surround you. You see, there's something that happens in the spiritual realm when you pray first that most people never realize. It's like turning on a light switch in a dark room. Suddenly, what seemed overwhelming becomes manageable. What appeared impossible becomes possible. What felt chaotic becomes ordered. And it all happens because you've invited the God of the universe to take His rightful place as Lord over your day. I want you to think about this for a moment. Every morning, you wake up to a battlefield. The enemy has been planning his attack on your peace, your purpose, and your progress while you were sleeping. He's prepared strategies to steal your joy, kill your dreams, and destroy your relationships. But here's what he doesn't want you to know. When you pray first, you're not just asking for help. You're activating heaven's army on your behalf. The Bible tells us in Ephesians that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This means that behind every challenge you face, every obstacle you encounter, every problem that seems to have no solution, there's a spiritual component. And you cannot win spiritual battles with natural weapons. You need supernatural power, divine wisdom, and heavenly strategy. When you make this one prayer your daily practice, you're essentially saying to God, "I recognize that this battle belongs to you. I'm not trying to fight it in my own strength. I'm positioning myself as your partner, your vessel, your instrument in the earth." And when God has a willing vessel, there's no limit to what He can do through you. Now let me share with you the first component of this life-changing prayer. And I want you to really listen, because this is where most people miss it. The first part is surrender. Not the kind of surrender that gives up, but the kind of surrender that gives over. You're taking everything that concerns you, everything that worries you, everything that you've been trying to control, and you're placing it in God's capable hands. This might sound simple, but it's actually one of the hardest things for us to do as human beings. We want to be in control. We want to have all the answers. We want to fix everything ourselves. But here's the truth. You were never meant to carry the weight of your world on your shoulders. You were never designed to figure everything out on your own. You were created to walk in partnership with your Creator. When you begin your day with surrender, you're acknowledging that God's ways are higher than your ways. His thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and His plans for you are good. You're saying, "Lord, I don't know what this day holds, but I know you hold this day. I don't know all the challenges I'll face, but I know you've already made a way through every single one." I remember talking to Jennifer, a nurse who worked in one of the busiest emergency rooms in the city. She would come home every night completely drained, emotionally exhausted, and spiritually depleted. The weight of what she witnessed daily was crushing her spirit. But when she learned to start each day with surrender, when she began praying this prayer before her shift, everything changed. She told me, "Pastor David, I still see the same difficult cases. I still work with the same challenging people. I still face the same pressures. But now I walk through it all with a peace that I can't explain. It's like I'm covered by an invisible shield. I have strength that isn't my own. I have wisdom that comes from somewhere beyond my training." That's the power of surrender, beloved. It doesn't necessarily change your circumstances, but it changes you. It positions you to receive divine strength for human weakness, heavenly wisdom for earthly confusion, and supernatural peace for natural chaos. The second component of this prayer is equally powerful, and it's this: seeking. Not seeking your own agenda, not seeking your own will, but seeking God's kingdom first. Jesus taught us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." This isn't just a religious phrase. This is a declaration that you want God's perfect will to manifest in your life, in your family, in your workplace, in your community. When you seek first the kingdom of God, something miraculous happens. All the things you've been worried about, all the needs you've been stressed over, all the provisions you've been trying to secure in your own strength suddenly become God's responsibility. The Bible promises that when we seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, all these things will be added unto us. But here's what seeking really means. It means you're more concerned with God's glory than your comfort. You're more interested in His purposes than your plans. You're more focused on His reputation than your success. And when you live with this kind of heart posture, when you genuinely seek His kingdom first, He takes care of everything else. Think about David in the Bible. Here was a man who understood what it meant to seek God first. Before he faced Goliath, he didn't just grab his sling and run toward the giant. He sought the Lord. He remembered God's faithfulness. He aligned his heart with heaven's perspective, and because he sought God first, he walked onto that battlefield not as an underdog, but as a champion carrying the power of the Almighty. The same God who gave David victory over Goliath wants to give you victory over every giant you're facing. But it starts with seeking. It starts with saying, "Lord, what do you want to do through my life today? How can I be your hands and feet in the earth? What divine appointments have you prepared for me? What opportunities to bless others will you place in my path?" When you start your day seeking God's kingdom, you stop living reactively and start living purposefully. Instead of just responding to whatever comes your way, you begin to walk in divine direction. Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstances, you realize you're a victor through Christ. Instead of wondering if God cares about your situation, you become confident that He's actively working all things together for your good. Maria understood this principle in a powerful way. She was a teacher in an inner-city school where violence was common, resources were scarce, and hope seemed to be in short supply. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and she was ready to quit. But when she learned to seek God's kingdom first, in her prayer time each morning, her entire perspective shifted. She began to see her classroom not just as a place of education, but as a mission field. She started viewing her students not just as kids with problems, but as souls with potential. She began approaching each day, not wondering what difficulties she would face, but expecting to see God move in miraculous ways. And He did. Test scores improved, behavior problems decreased. Other teachers began asking her what was different, and it all started with seeking God's kingdom first. The third component of this prayer is perhaps the most practical, and it's this: submitting. Submitting your plans to God's purposes, your timeline to His timing, your methods to His ways. This is where you say, "Lord, I have ideas about how this day should go, but I hold them loosely. If you want to redirect me, I'm willing. If you want to use me differently than I planned, I'm available. If you have divine appointments that aren't on my calendar, I'm ready." Submission isn't weakness, beloved. Submission is wisdom. It's recognizing that the God who created the universe, who holds the stars in place, who knows the end from the beginning, might have better ideas than you do about how your day should unfold. It's acknowledging that His ways are perfect, His timing is flawless, and His plans are always for your ultimate good. When you submit your day to God, you're essentially saying, "I trust you more than I trust my own understanding. I believe your love for me is so complete that you'll never lead me anywhere that isn't ultimately for my blessing." And when you live with this kind of trust, when you submit your plans to His purposes, you experience a freedom that most people never know. You stop trying to force doors open that God wants to keep closed. You stop pushing against His will when He's trying to redirect you toward something better. You stop wrestling with Him when He wants to wrestle for you, And in that place of submission, you find rest for your soul and strength for your journey. I think about Abraham, a man who understood submission in the deepest way. When God asked him to leave everything familiar and go to a land he had never seen, Abraham could have argued. He could have negotiated. He could have asked for a detailed plan. But instead, he submitted. He trusted God's heart even when he couldn't see God's hand. And because of his submission, he became the father of nations and a friend of God. God is looking for people today who will submit their plans to his purposes, who will trust his heart even when they can't see his hand, who will walk by faith even when the path isn't clear. He's looking for people who understand that his ways are always better, his timing is always perfect, and his plans are always good. Now, when you combine these three components, surrender, seeking, and submission, something powerful happens. You create what I call a divine alignment. Your heart becomes aligned with God's heart. Your mind becomes aligned with God's mind. Your will becomes aligned with God's will. And when you're in divine alignment, miracles become normal, breakthroughs become expected, and victory becomes your daily experience. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't a one-time prayer. This isn't something you do once and then forget about. This is a daily practice, a lifestyle, a way of approaching every single morning for the rest of your life. Because every day brings new challenges, new opportunities, new battles, and new blessings. And every day you need fresh strength, fresh wisdom, fresh direction, and fresh anointing. The beautiful thing about making this a daily practice is that it becomes easier over time, not harder. Just like a muscle grows stronger with exercise, your spiritual sensitivity increases with consistency. What might feel awkward or unfamiliar at first becomes as natural as breathing. What might seem time-consuming initially becomes the most efficient minutes of your entire day. I want to share something with you that might surprise you. The people who say they don't have time to pray are usually the ones who need prayer the most. They're the ones running frantically from one crisis to the next, putting out fires all day long, feeling like they're always behind, always overwhelmed, always struggling to keep up. But when you start your day with this prayer, when you take those few minutes to align yourself with heaven's agenda, you actually create more time than you invest. How is this possible? Because when you're walking in divine alignment, you make better decisions. You avoid unnecessary detours. You recognize opportunities that others miss. You have wisdom to prioritize what matters most. You experience favor that opens doors and removes obstacles. You walk in a supernatural efficiency that can only come from partnering with the God who created time itself. Let me tell you about Robert, a construction foreman who was skeptical about this whole concept. He prided himself on being practical, no nonsense, focused on getting things done. His mornings were rushed affairs, quick shower, grab coffee, rush to the job site. He thought prayer was for people who had nothing better to do with their time. But his wife kept encouraging him to try this practice. And finally, more to prove her wrong than anything else, he agreed to give it 30 days. He would wake up 15 minutes earlier and spend that time in prayer using these three components. He figured, after a month of no change, he could go back to his old routine and she would stop bothering him about it. What happened over those 30 days shocked him. Projects that had been delayed for weeks suddenly got the green light. Suppliers who had been difficult to work with became cooperative. His crew, which had been dealing with personality conflicts, started working together like a well-oiled machine. A major contract that he thought was lost came through at the last minute. But the changes weren't just professional. His relationship with his wife improved, his stress levels decreased, his health got better, his attitude became more positive. And all of this happened because he started each day with surrender, seeking and submission. Robert told me later, "Pastor, I thought prayer was about asking God to bless my plans. I never realized it was about aligning my plans with His blessing. I never understood that those 15 minutes weren't time taken away from my productivity. They were the foundation of my productivity. This is what happens when you understand the true power of this prayer. It's not about adding another item to your to-do list. It's about transforming how you approach your entire list. It's not about spending more time in spiritual activities. It's about making all your activities spiritual by starting them from the right place. Now, I want to address something that some of you might be wrestling with. You might be thinking, this sounds great in theory, but you don't know my situation. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the responsibilities I carry, the problems I'm facing. This might work for other people, but my circumstances are different. Friend, I've heard this concern many times over the years, and I understand it. We all face unique challenges, carry different burdens, and walk through various seasons of difficulty. But here's what I've learned through 2 decades of ministry. God is not intimidated by your circumstances. He's not surprised by your challenges. He's not overwhelmed by your problems. The same God who parted the Red Sea for Moses can make a way through your impossible situation. The same God who provided manna in the wilderness can provide for your needs. The same God who gave Daniel favor in a foreign land can give you favor in hostile environments. The same God who protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace can protect you in the heat of your trials. But here's the key. All of these biblical heroes had one thing in common. They understood the principle of seeking God first. They didn't wait until they were in trouble to pray. They didn't make prayer their last resort when everything else failed. They made communion with God their first priority, their daily practice, their spiritual foundation. Daniel, even when he knew that praying could cost him his life, continued his practice of seeking God 3 times a day. His commitment to prayer wasn't based on convenience or circumstances. It was based on his understanding that connection with God was more essential than his next breath. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't suddenly discover faith when they were facing the furnace. Their trust in God was built through daily relationship, daily surrender, daily seeking of His face. When the crisis came, they were ready because they had been preparing their hearts through consistent prayer. This is why this prayer is so crucial, beloved. It's not just about getting through today. It's about building spiritual strength for whatever tomorrow might bring. It's about developing unshakable faith before the storms come. It's about establishing a relationship with God that can sustain you through any season of life. Think about it this way. If you knew that a hurricane was coming, you wouldn't wait until the winds started blowing to prepare your house. You would board up the windows, secure loose items, and stock up on supplies before the storm arrived. In the same way, daily prayer is how you prepare your heart for the storms of life that are inevitable in this fallen world. But it's not just about protection and preparation. This prayer also positions you to receive the blessings that God wants to pour out in your life. You see, God is always looking for people He can trust with His favor, His resources, His opportunities. He's searching for individuals who will give Him glory when they're blessed, who will use their influence to bless others, who will remain humble when they're promoted. When you start your day with surrender, seeking, and submission, you're essentially telling God, I'm trustworthy. You can bless me because I understand that every good gift comes from you. You can promote me because I know that promotion comes from you. You can give me influence because I'll use it to advance your kingdom. I've seen this principle work in the lives of countless people over the years. I've watched God elevate individuals who made prayer their priority. I've witnessed Him open doors for those who sought His kingdom first. I've seen Him provide supernaturally for families who submitted their finances to His lordship. But I've also seen the opposite. I've counseled successful people who built their lives without God and found themselves empty and unfulfilled at the peak of their achievements. I've talked to wealthy individuals who gained the whole world but lost their souls in the process. I've ministered to families who achieved everything they thought they wanted, but discovered it wasn't enough to fill the God-shaped void in their hearts. Here's what I want you to understand. Success without God is ultimately failure, but failure with God is the setup for a comeback. Wealth without God is poverty of the soul, but poverty with God is the foundation for supernatural provision. Achievement without God is vanity, but surrender to God leads to accomplishments that have eternal significance. This is why this prayer is not optional if you want to live the life God intended for you. It's not a suggestion for people who are naturally spiritual. It's an essential practice for anyone who wants to experience the fullness of what God has planned for their life. Now let me share with you exactly how to implement this prayer in your daily routine, because knowing what to do is only half the battle. Actually doing it consistently is where transformation happens. First, I want you to choose a specific time each morning when you will pray this prayer. It doesn't have to be at dawn, though there's something powerful about seeking God while the world is still quiet. It could be right when you wake up before you get out of bed. It could be while you're having your morning coffee. It could be during your commute to work. The key is consistency. Choose a time that works with your schedule and stick to it. Don't let the tyranny of the urgent crowd out what's truly important. Remember, you're not just adding prayer to your routine, you're building your routine around prayer. Second, find a place where you can focus without distractions. This might be a quiet corner of your bedroom, a chair by the window, your car before you start driving, or even your office before anyone else arrives. The location isn't as important as the intention. You're creating a sacred space where you meet with God. Third, eliminate distractions during this time. Turn off your phone or put it in another room. Don't check emails or social media. Don't think about your to-do list. This time belongs to God and God alone. Everything else can wait. Fourth, begin with gratitude. Before you surrender your concerns, seek God's kingdom, or submit your plans, take a moment to thank Him for His faithfulness. Thank Him for the breath in your lungs, the roof over your head, the people you love. Gratitude shifts your perspective and prepares your heart to receive from God. Fifth, be specific in your surrender. Don't just say, "God, I give you my day." Tell Him exactly what you're worried about, what you're facing, what you need His help with. Name your concerns, your fears, your challenges. Lay them at His feet one by one. Sixth, be intentional in your seeking. Ask God what He wants to accomplish through your life today. How does He want to use you to bless others? What opportunities for ministry will He place in your path? How can you represent His kingdom in your workplace, your family, your community? Seventh, be genuine in your submission. This isn't about saying the right words, it's about meaning what you say. Tell God that you're willing to have your plans changed if He has something better. Express your desire to walk in His ways, even when they're different from your ways. Finally, end with expectation. Don't just hope that God will work. Expect Him to work. Anticipate divine appointments, supernatural provision, miraculous breakthroughs. Faith expects results, and God honors faith. I know this might seem like a lot, but remember, this entire process can take just 5 to 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes that will transform the other 23 hours and 50 minutes of your day. 5 to 10 minutes that will change how you think, how you feel, how you respond to challenges, and how you walk in victory. But here's what I want you to understand about this prayer. It's not a formula you follow, it's a relationship you build. It's not about perfect words, it's about a perfect heart attitude. It's not about impressing God with your eloquence. It's about expressing your dependence on His goodness. God isn't looking for polished prayers from professional ministers. He's looking for authentic hearts from His beloved children. He wants to hear from you, not because you have all the right words, but because you belong to Him. He delights in your voice, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Some of the most powerful prayers I've ever heard have been simple, heartfelt conversations between a child and their Heavenly Father. God, I'm scared about this meeting today. Please help me. Lord, I don't know how to handle this situation with my teenager. I need your wisdom. Father, my marriage is struggling. Please show me how to love better. These aren't theological dissertations or eloquent speeches. They're honest expressions of human need and divine dependence, and God hears every one of them. He responds to sincerity, not sophistication. He moves in response to faith, not fancy language. So as we continue to explore this life-changing prayer, I want you to understand something that will revolutionize how you approach not just your mornings, but your entire relationship with God. There's a fourth component that I haven't shared with you yet, and it's perhaps the most powerful of all. It's the component of expectation. You see, many people pray with hope, some pray with faith, but few pray with genuine expectation. There's a difference between hoping God will work and expecting God to work. There's a distinction between believing God can move and knowing God will move. When you add expectation to your surrender, seeking, and submission, you create an atmosphere where miracles become inevitable. Let me tell you about expectation through the story of a woman I'll call Patricia. She was a single mother of 4 children, working 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. Every morning felt like climbing Mount Everest with weights tied to her ankles. Her car was constantly breaking down. Her rent was always late, and she felt like she was failing her children in every possible way. When Patricia first heard about this prayer, she was skeptical. She had prayed before. She had asked God for help countless times. But nothing seemed to change. Her circumstances remained difficult, her struggles continued, and she wondered if God was even listening. But here's what Patricia didn't understand initially. She was praying with desperation, not expectation. She was asking God to help, but deep down, she didn't really believe He would. She was going through the motions of prayer without the power of expectation. When I taught her about praying with expectation, everything shifted. Instead of saying, "God, please help me if you can," she began to pray, "God, I expect you to make a way because you always make a way for your children." Instead of hoping things might get better, she started anticipating the breakthrough that was already on its way. The change wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Within 3 months, Patricia received a job offer that doubled her income. Her landlord, who had been threatening eviction, suddenly offered her a payment plan that worked with her budget. Her car, which had been on its last legs, was repaired by a mechanic who felt led to do the work for free. But the most remarkable change was in Patricia herself. She walked differently, she talked differently, she faced challenges differently. Where once she saw obstacles, now she saw opportunities for God to demonstrate His faithfulness. Where once she felt defeated before the day even began, now she woke up excited to see how God would move. This is the power of expectation, beloved. When you pray expecting God to work, you position yourself to recognize His movement when it happens. When you start your day anticipating divine intervention, you become sensitive to the miraculous that others might miss. Think about the difference between going to a movie theater expecting to be entertained versus going expecting to be bored. Your expectation shapes your experience. If you expect to enjoy the film, you're more likely to appreciate the good parts and overlook the flaws. If you expect to be disappointed, you'll focus on every imperfection and miss the beauty. The same principle applies to your daily walk with God. When you wake up expecting Him to work in your life, you become attuned to His presence throughout the day. You notice the divine appointments He arranges. You recognize the doors He opens. You see His hand in circumstances that others would call coincidence. But expectation without action is just wishful thinking. True biblical expectation always leads to corresponding action. When you genuinely expect God to work, you position yourself to participate in what He's doing. You make yourself available for His use. You prepare for the breakthrough you're believing for. I remember counseling a man named Kenneth who had been unemployed for 8 months. He was sending out resumes, going to interviews, but nothing was working out. He was becoming discouraged and starting to wonder if God had forgotten about him. When Kenneth learned to pray with expectation, he didn't just ask God for a job. He began expecting God to connect him with the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. But here's what changed. His expectation led to action. Instead of just sitting at home feeling sorry for himself, he started volunteering at a local charity. Instead of just complaining about his situation, he began using his skills to help others. It was during one of those volunteer days that Kenneth met a business owner who was impressed with his work ethic and attitude. That conversation led to an interview, which led to a job offer that was better than anything Kenneth had been applying for. But it never would have happened if expectation hadn't led to action. This is why this prayer is so transformative. It doesn't just change your circumstances, though it often does. It changes you. It changes how you see, how you think, how you respond, how you live. When you start each day with surrender, seeking, submission, and expectation, you become a different person, walking through the same world. Now let me address something that might be troubling some of you. You might be thinking, Pastor David, what if I pray this prayer and nothing changes? What if I surrender, seek, submit, and expect, but my circumstances remain the same? Does that mean the prayer doesn't work? Does that mean God isn't listening? These are honest questions, and they deserve honest answers. First, understand that God's timeline is not our timeline. His ways of working are not always our ways of working. Sometimes he moves immediately, sometimes he moves gradually, and sometimes he's moving in ways we can't see or understand yet. But here's what I want you to grasp. Even when your circumstances don't change immediately, you change immediately. The moment you begin to pray this way, something shifts in your spirit. Peace replaces anxiety, faith overcomes fear, hope conquers despair. And these internal changes are often more valuable than external changes. I think about the Apostle Paul, who prayed 3 times for God to remove a thorn in his flesh. God didn't remove the thorn, but he gave Paul something better. He gave him grace sufficient for the struggle and strength made perfect in weakness. Sometimes God's answer isn't to change our circumstances, but to change us in our circumstances. There's also this reality we must consider. Sometimes God's delay is actually God's protection. Sometimes what we think we need immediately isn't what's best for us ultimately. Sometimes God is preparing us for a blessing that's bigger than what we originally asked for, and the preparation takes time. I counseled a young woman named Lisa who desperately wanted to get married. She prayed this prayer every morning, surrendering her desire for a husband, seeking God's will for her relationships, submitting her timeline to His timing, and expecting Him to bring the right person into her life. Months passed, then years, and Lisa remained single. She began to wonder if God was ignoring her prayers or if she was somehow doing something wrong. But during those years of waiting, God was doing something beautiful in Lisa's heart. He was healing wounds from her past, developing her character, deepening her relationship with Him, and preparing her for the godly man He had planned for her. When Lisa finally met her future husband, she realized that if she had married any of the men she had been interested in earlier, it would have been a disaster. God's delay wasn't denial, it was preparation. His timing wasn't late, it was perfect. This is why expectation must always be coupled with trust. We expect God to work, but we trust Him with how He works and when He works. We anticipate His movement, but we accept His methods. We believe for breakthrough, but we bow to His wisdom. Now let me share with you some practical ways to maintain this expectation throughout your day, because the goal isn't just to pray with expectation in the morning and then forget about it. The goal is to live with expectation all day long. First, create what I call expectation reminders. Set alarms on your phone at different times throughout the day with messages like, God is working right now, or expect something good today, or divine appointments are coming. These little reminders will help keep your heart in a posture of anticipation. Second, keep an expectation journal. At the end of each day, write down one thing that happened that could have been God working in your life. It might be a conversation that encouraged you, an opportunity that presented itself, a problem that resolved itself, or simply a peace that came over you in a stressful moment. The more you look for God's movement, the more you'll see it. Third, share your expectations with trusted friends or family members. When you verbalize what you're believing God for, it reinforces your faith and creates accountability. It also allows others to celebrate with you when you see God work and to encourage you when you're tempted to doubt. Fourth, pray throughout the day, not just in the morning. Every time you face a challenge, before you react in fear or frustration, take a moment to reconnect with God. Remind yourself of your morning surrender, seeking and submission. Renew your expectation that He's working even in difficult circumstances. Fifth, practice gratitude for answers before you see them. This isn't presumption, it's faith. When you thank God in advance for what He's going to do, you're demonstrating the kind of trust that moves His heart. You're showing that your expectation is genuine, not just wishful thinking. I want you to understand something profound about this practice of expectation. It doesn't just change what happens to you, it changes what happens through you. When you walk through life expecting God to work, you become someone through whom God can work. Your expectation creates an atmosphere that attracts the supernatural. People are drawn to those who live with genuine expectation. There's something magnetic about someone who truly believes good things are coming. There's an energy, a hope, a confidence that's contagious. When you live this way, you become a source of encouragement to everyone around you. I remember a businessman named Charles who implemented this prayer into his daily routine. Charles owned a small restaurant that was struggling to stay afloat. Competition was fierce, costs were rising, and customers were few. But Charles began each day with surrender, seeking, submission, and expectation. Something remarkable happened over the following months. Charles's attitude became so positive, his faith so evident, his expectations so genuine, that customers began coming not just for the food, but for the atmosphere. People wanted to be around someone who radiated hope and faith. Employees wanted to work for someone who believed good things were possible. The restaurant not only survived, but thrived. But more importantly, it became a place where people encountered hope. Charles had countless opportunities to share his faith, to encourage struggling individuals, to be a light in his community. His expectation didn't just transform his business, it transformed his ministry. This is what happens when you understand the full power of this prayer. You don't just experience breakthrough in your own life, you become a conduit for breakthrough in other people's lives. Your surrender, seeking, submission, and expectation create ripple effects that touch everyone in your sphere of influence. But let me warn you about something that the enemy will try to do once you start living this way. He will try to steal your expectation through disappointment. He'll point to prayers that seem unanswered, dreams that seem delayed, promises that seem unfulfilled. He'll whisper that this prayer stuff is just wishful thinking, that you're being naive, that you should lower your expectations to avoid disappointment. Don't listen to him, beloved. Disappointment is not the opposite of expectation. Despair is. Disappointment says, that didn't work out the way I hoped, but I'll keep hoping. Despair says, nothing ever works out, so why bother hoping? Disappointment is temporary. Despair is terminal. When disappointment comes, and it will, let it drive you deeper into this prayer, not away from it. Let it increase your surrender, not decrease it. Let it intensify your seeking, not diminish it. Let it strengthen your submission, not weaken it. Let it refine your expectation, not eliminate it. Remember, every biblical hero faced seasons of disappointment. Abraham waited 25 years for the son God promised. Joseph spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. David was anointed as king, but spent years running from Saul. But their disappointments didn't destroy their expectation. They developed it. This is why daily prayer is so crucial. Every morning, you get to start fresh. Every morning, God's mercies are new. Every morning, you have another opportunity to surrender, seek, submit, and expect. Yesterday's disappointments don't have to define today's possibilities. Now, as we near the end of our time together, I want to give you one final component of this life-changing prayer. It's the component of declaration. After you surrender, seek, submit, and expect, I want you to declare God's promises over your life and your day. Declaration is different from petition. When you petition, you're asking God to do something. When you declare, you're proclaiming what God has already said He will do. Declaration is faith, speaking God's word back to Him. It's agreeing with heaven about your identity, your destiny, and your victory. Here are some declarations you can speak every morning after your prayer time. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God has plans for me that are good and not evil, to give me a future and a hope. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Greater is He who is in me than he who is in the world. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. When you speak these declarations, you're not trying to convince God of something He doesn't know. You're convincing yourself of something you tend to forget. You're reminding your heart of truths that your circumstances might try to contradict. You're setting the spiritual atmosphere for your day. I want you to understand that declaration is not positive thinking or self-help psychology. Declaration is spiritual warfare. Every time you speak God's promises over your life, you're pushing back the darkness that wants to define you by your circumstances instead of your identity in Christ. The Bible tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. When you declare God's promises, you're speaking life over every area of your existence. When you proclaim His goodness, you're creating an atmosphere where His goodness can manifest. When you announce His faithfulness, you're positioning yourself to experience His faithfulness. This is why your morning prayer should end with declaration. You've surrendered your burdens, sought His kingdom, submitted your plans, expressed your expectation, and now you declare His promises. You're essentially saying, God, based on your word, this is what I believe about today. This is what I expect to experience. This is who I am and whose I am. As I bring this message to a close, I want you to know that what I've shared with you today isn't just theory or theology. This is a practical, powerful, life-changing reality that has transformed countless lives, including my own. This one prayer, with its components of surrender, seeking, submission, expectation, and declaration, has the power to shift everything in your life. But knowing about this prayer isn't enough. Reading about these principles won't change anything. You must apply what you've learned. You must make this a daily practice. You must commit to starting tomorrow morning with this prayer and continuing it every morning for the rest of your life. I challenge you to give this 30 days. For the next 30 days, wake up 15 minutes earlier than usual. Spend that time in prayer using the components I've shared with you. Surrender your concerns, seek God's kingdom, submit your plans, expect His movement, and declare His promises. Keep a journal during these 30 days. Write down what you prayed for, what you expected, and what actually happened. Note the changes in your attitude, your relationships, your circumstances, your peace level, your joy, your hope. I believe you'll be amazed at what God does in and through your life when you make this commitment. But don't stop at 30 days. Let this become your lifestyle. Let this be how you approach every single morning for the rest of your life. Because every day brings new challenges, new opportunities, new battles, and new blessings. And every day you need fresh surrender, fresh seeking, fresh submission, fresh expectation, and fresh declaration. Remember, beloved, you were not created to live in defeat, despair, or discouragement. You were created to live in victory, hope, and joy. You were not designed to face life's challenges in your own strength. You were designed to walk in partnership with the God of the universe. This one prayer can shift everything in your life because it shifts you. It changes your perspective, your priorities, your peace, and your power. It aligns you with heaven's agenda instead of hell's attacks. It positions you to receive God's best instead of settling for life's leftovers. The question now is not whether this prayer works. The question is whether you'll work this prayer. Will you make the commitment to start tomorrow morning? Will you set your alarm 15 minutes earlier? Will you create a quiet space where you can meet with God? Will you surrender, seek, submit, expect, and declare? Your life is waiting for this decision. Your breakthrough is waiting for this commitment. Your destiny is waiting for this prayer. Everything can change starting tomorrow morning if you'll just remember to always pray first. The enemy knows that if he can steal your first 15 minutes, he can influence your entire day. That's why he works overtime to fill your morning with distractions, emergencies, and urgent demands that aren't actually urgent at all. He'll make your phone buzz with notifications the moment you wake up. He'll remind you of that deadline that's still days away. He'll whisper about all the things that could go wrong today before you even get out of bed. But here's what the devil doesn't want you to discover. When you consistently choose prayer first, you're not just starting your day differently, you're rewiring your spiritual DNA. You're training your heart to turn toward heaven before turning toward earth. You're developing what I call divine reflexes. Think about it this way. When a professional athlete faces a crisis moment in their sport, they don't have time to think about what they should do. Their body responds based on thousands of hours of training. The muscle memory kicks in automatically. In the same way, when you practice this prayer consistently, when spiritual crisis moments come, and they will come, your heart will automatically turn toward God instead of toward panic. I witnessed this principle in action with a woman named Rachel who came to our church broken and desperate. Her husband had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Her teenage son was struggling with addiction, and she had just lost her job. She felt like her world was collapsing, and she didn't know how to hold it together. When Rachel first heard about this prayer practice, she was honest with me. She said, "Pastor David, I don't have 15 minutes. I barely have 5 minutes between caring for my husband, dealing with my son's problems, and trying to find work. How can I possibly add another responsibility to my already overwhelming schedule?" I looked at Rachel and said something that surprised even me in the moment. "Sister, you don't have time not to pray. Your circumstances are so intense, your burdens so heavy, your challenges so complex that attempting to handle them without divine assistance is like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife. You need supernatural intervention, and that starts with supernatural connection." Rachel reluctantly agreed to try this prayer for just 1 week. She would wake up 10 minutes earlier, not 15, just 10, and spend that time surrendering, seeking, submitting, expecting, and declaring. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. By day 3, Rachel noticed something shifting inside her. The overwhelming anxiety that used to greet her every morning began to be replaced by a strange peace. By day 5, she was making decisions with clarity she hadn't experienced in months. By day 7, opportunities began presenting themselves that she never could have orchestrated on her own. A former colleague called out of nowhere with a job opportunity that was perfect for her situation. Flexible hours, good pay, understanding management. Her son's school counselor reached out with information about a program that had helped other families dealing with similar struggles. Her husband's doctor mentioned a new treatment protocol that was showing promising results. But the most remarkable change was in Rachel herself. She told me, "Pastor, I'm facing the same impossible circumstances, but I'm not the same person facing them. That 10 minutes of prayer each morning isn't just changing my day, it's changing me. I'm stronger, more peaceful, more hopeful, more trusting. I feel like I'm partnering with God instead of battling alone. This is the miracle that happens when you understand that prayer isn't about adding another task to your busy life. Prayer is about empowering every other task in your life. It's not about finding time for God. It's about allowing God to multiply your time. There's a mathematical principle at work here that defies natural logic. When you give God the first portion of your day, He has a way of blessing and multiplying the remaining hours. Minutes spent in prayer somehow create hours of increased productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. I remember reading about a study done with business executives who incorporated meditation into their morning routine. The researchers found that these leaders didn't just become more peaceful, they became more productive. Their decision-making improved, their stress levels decreased, their creativity increased, their relationships got better, and this was just with secular meditation. Imagine what happens when you don't just meditate, but when you actually connect with the living God who created you, loves you, and has plans for your life. Imagine the exponential impact when you're not just clearing your mind, but filling your heart with divine wisdom, strength, and direction. Now let me share something with you that might revolutionize how you think about this entire practice. Many people approach prayer like it's a one-way conversation. They talk to God and hope He's listening. But what I'm describing to you is actually a divine exchange. You give God your burdens, and He gives you His peace. You give Him your confusion, and He gives you His clarity. You give Him your weakness, and He gives you His strength. This exchange doesn't happen because you deserve it or because you've earned it. It happens because of God's incredible love for you and His desire to partner with you in living the life He designed you to live. Every morning, He's waiting for this exchange. Every morning, He's ready to take what's weighing you down and replace it with what will lift you up. But here's something crucial that I need you to understand. This exchange requires your participation. God won't force His peace on you if you insist on carrying your anxiety. He won't impose His clarity if you refuse to surrender your confusion. He won't download His strength if you're determined to operate in your own power. The exchange happens through surrender. The moment you genuinely release your grip on whatever you've been trying to control, God can take hold of it. The instant you stop trying to figure everything out on your own, His wisdom becomes available to you. The second you admit that you need help, His help becomes accessible. I think about the story of Peter walking on water. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, as long as he trusted in divine power instead of natural ability, he did the impossible. But the moment he looked at the storm, the moment he began to doubt, the moment he relied on his own understanding instead of supernatural faith, he began to sink. This is exactly what happens to us every single day. When we start our mornings focused on Jesus, trusting His power, depending on His wisdom, we walk on water. We do things that should be impossible. We handle situations that should overwhelm us. We find solutions that should be beyond our capability. But when we take our eyes off Him and focus on the storm, the bills, the problems, the pressures, the people who oppose us, we start to sink. We become victims of our circumstances instead of victors through Christ. We react to life instead of responding from a place of faith. This is why the timing of this prayer is so critical. It's not just about praying sometime during the day. It's about praying first, before the storms of life can capture your attention and steal your focus. It's about establishing your spiritual equilibrium before the world tries to knock you off balance. Let me tell you about Michael, a police officer who worked in one of the most dangerous precincts in our city. Every day, Michael faced situations that could literally be life or death. He dealt with violence, hatred, desperation, and evil on a regular basis. For years, he carried the weight of these experiences home with him. His marriage was suffering. His health was declining. His faith was wavering. When Michael learned about this prayer practice, he was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. He began waking up 30 minutes before his shift to pray through surrender, seeking submission, expectation, and declaration. He would surrender the dangers he might face, seek God's wisdom for difficult situations, submit his safety to divine protection, expect God to use him to make a difference, and declare God's promises over his day. The change in Michael was remarkable. He began approaching his job not as someone who had to survive another dangerous day, but as someone who was sent by God to be light in dark places. His interactions with suspects became more calm and effective. His relationships with fellow officers improved. His stress levels decreased dramatically, but the most amazing part was what happened at home. Michael's wife told me, "Pastor, it's like I got my husband back. He's not carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. He's peaceful, present, and positive. Our marriage is stronger than it's been in years." Michael's circumstances didn't change. He still worked in the same dangerous environment. But his approach to those circumstances was completely transformed because his mornings were transformed. He was the same man in the same job, but he was operating from a completely different spiritual foundation. This is what I want you to understand about this prayer. It doesn't promise to eliminate your challenges, but it guarantees to change your approach to your challenges. It doesn't necessarily remove your problems, but it absolutely transforms your perspective on your problems. When you surrender first thing in the morning, you approach problems as someone who has divine backup. When you seek God's kingdom first, you face challenges as someone who has eternal perspective. When you submit your plans to God, you handle setbacks as someone who trusts divine timing. When you expect God to work, you encounter obstacles as someone who believes in breakthrough. When you declare God's promises, you confront opposition as someone who knows the victory is already won. Now, I want to address something that some of you might be struggling with as you consider implementing this practice. You might be thinking, "Pastor David, this sounds wonderful, but I've tried to pray regularly before, and I always fall off track. I'll do well for a few days, or maybe even a few weeks, but then life gets busy and I forget, or I oversleep, or something comes up, and before I know it, I'm back to my old routine." First, let me tell you that you're not alone in this struggle. Building any new habit is challenging, and building a spiritual habit can feel even more difficult because you're literally fighting against spiritual forces that don't want you to succeed. The enemy will do everything in his power to disrupt this practice because he knows how transformative it can be. But here's what I've learned from years of helping people establish consistent prayer lives. The key is not perfection, it's persistence. You don't have to pray perfectly every morning for the rest of your life starting tomorrow. You just have to pray tomorrow morning, then the day after that, then the day after that. Don't focus on the lifetime commitment. That can feel overwhelming. Focus on the daily commitment. Don't worry about never missing a day. Just worry about not missing today. Don't stress about maintaining this practice during busy seasons. Just concentrate on maintaining it this season. I also want to give you some practical strategies that have helped thousands of people establish this life-changing routine. First, start smaller than you think you should. If 15 minutes feels overwhelming, start with 5 minutes. If 5 minutes feels like too much, start with 3 minutes. The goal is not to impress God with the length of your prayers, but to connect with God through the consistency of your prayers. Second, attach this new habit to an existing habit. Maybe you already drink coffee every morning. Pray while the coffee is brewing. Maybe you already take a shower every morning. Pray before you get in the shower. Maybe you already check your phone when you wake up. Pray before you pick up your phone. Linking your new habit to an established routine makes it much easier to remember and maintain. Third, prepare everything the night before. If you're going to read scripture during your prayer time, have your Bible open to the passage you want to read. If you're going to journal, have your pen and notebook ready. If you're going to pray in a specific location, make sure that space is clean and inviting. Removing barriers and obstacles makes it much easier to follow through when your alarm goes off. Fourth, get an accountability partner. Share your commitment with a trusted friend or family member who will check in with you regularly. Ask them to pray for your consistency and to gently remind you of your commitment when you're tempted to skip. Having someone else invested in your success dramatically increases your chances of maintaining this practice. Fifth, track your progress visually. Create a simple calendar where you can mark off each day that you complete your morning prayer. Seeing your streak of consistent days can be incredibly motivating. When you miss a day, and you probably will at some point, don't beat yourself up. Just start a new streak the next day. Sixth, celebrate small wins. After your first week of consistency, do something to celebrate. After your first month, acknowledge the milestone. After 3 months, reflect on how this practice has changed your life. Celebrating progress reinforces the positive habit and motivates you to continue. Finally, remember your why. When you don't feel like praying, when you want to hit the snooze button, when you're tempted to skip just this once, remind yourself why you started this practice. Remember the transformation you're seeking. Remember the peace you want to experience. Remember the breakthrough you're believing for. I want to share with you a story that perfectly illustrates the power of persistence in prayer. There was a man named David, not me, a different David, who came to our church completely broken. His business had failed, his marriage was ending, his health was declining, and he was battling severe depression. He felt like God had abandoned him and life wasn't worth living. When David first heard about this prayer practice, he was resistant. He told me, "Pastor, I've prayed more in the last 2 years than I prayed in the previous 20 years combined. If prayer was going to work, wouldn't it have worked by now? I'm tired of talking to God and feeling like he's not listening." I understood David's frustration, but I challenged him with this perspective. Maybe the problem isn't that God isn't listening. Maybe the problem is that you've been praying from a place of desperation instead of a place of relationship. Maybe you've been treating prayer like a 911 call instead of a daily conversation with someone who loves you. David reluctantly agreed to try this structured approach to morning prayer for 30 days. He committed to waking up just 10 minutes earlier and working through surrender, seeking, submission, expectation, and declaration. For the first week, David admitted he felt nothing. No peace, no breakthrough, no sense of God's presence. But David kept going. Week 2 was a little better. Not because his circumstances changed, but because his attitude began to shift slightly. By week 3, David noticed he was sleeping better and worrying less. By the end of the 30 days, David was a different man. His circumstances were still challenging, the business was still closed, the divorce was still proceeding, his health issues were still present. But David was no longer crushed by these realities. He had peace in the midst of chaos. He had hope in the midst of heartbreak. He had strength in the midst of struggle. Over the following months, as David maintained this prayer practice, his life began to transform in remarkable ways. He found a new job that was better than his previous business. He and his wife began counseling and ultimately reconciled. His health improved dramatically. His depression lifted completely. But David told me something that has stuck with me for years. He said, "Pastor, the most important change wasn't in my circumstances. The most important change was in my relationship with God." Through this daily practice, I discovered that God wasn't distant or uncaring. He was present and loving all along. I just wasn't positioned to experience his presence. This is what consistency in prayer does, beloved. It doesn't just change your circumstances, though it often does. It changes your capacity to recognize God's presence, hear his voice, and experience his love regardless of your circumstances. Every morning that you choose to pray first, you're making a declaration that God matters more than your problems. Every morning that you surrender instead of strategize, You're acknowledging that His ways are higher than your ways. Every morning that you seek His kingdom before seeking your own agenda, you're aligning yourself with eternal purposes instead of temporary pressures. But let me tell you what happens when you miss a morning. When you oversleep or get distracted or just decide to skip your prayer time just this once, you don't lose your salvation. You don't fall out of God's favor. You don't forfeit all the benefits of previous prayers. But you do miss an opportunity for divine connection, heavenly perspective, and supernatural empowerment. Think of it this way. If you skip breakfast, you don't die. Your body doesn't shut down. You can still function throughout the day, but you'll be weaker, less energetic, more prone to poor decisions, and more likely to make unhealthy choices later. In the same way, when you skip your spiritual breakfast, this morning prayer time, you don't spiritually die, but you do operate from a place of spiritual weakness rather than spiritual strength. This is why I'm so passionate about helping you establish this practice. I've seen too many believers trying to live the Christian life on empty spiritual stomachs. They're weak when they could be strong, anxious when they could be peaceful, confused when they could be clear, defeated when they could be victorious. But I've also seen what happens when believers fuel themselves spiritually every morning. They walk through the same challenges as everyone else, but they walk through them differently. They face the same pressures, but they respond to them differently. They encounter the same obstacles, but they overcome them differently. The difference isn't in their circumstances. The difference is in their spiritual condition. And spiritual condition is determined by spiritual nutrition. Just as your physical body needs daily food to maintain strength and health, your spiritual man needs daily communion with God to maintain peace and power. Now, as we continue to explore this life-changing practice, I want to share with you something that will revolutionize not just your morning routine, but your entire approach to living. There's a secret that most people never discover about prayer, and once you understand it, you'll never think about communication with God the same way again. Most people think prayer is about getting God to do what they want Him to do. They approach prayer like a cosmic vending machine, insert the right coins, push the right buttons, and get the desired outcome. But true prayer, transformative prayer, life-changing prayer is actually about getting yourself to want what God wants. When you surrender each morning, you're not just giving God your problems, you're giving Him permission to change your heart about those problems. When you seek His kingdom first, you're not just asking Him to bless your plans. You're asking Him to align your plans with His purposes. When you submit your day to His Lordship, you're not just requesting His help. You're requesting His transformation of your desires. This is why this prayer is so powerful. It doesn't just change what happens to you, it changes what happens in you. It doesn't just alter your circumstances, it alters your character. It doesn't just modify your situation, it modifies your soul. I remember counseling a young woman named Jessica, who was frustrated because she felt like her prayers weren't being answered. She had been praying for months for her boyfriend to propose to her, but he seemed content with their current relationship status. She was becoming bitter, resentful, and angry at God. When I taught Jessica about this approach to prayer, something beautiful happened. Instead of demanding that God change her boyfriend's timeline, she began surrendering her timeline to God. Instead of seeking her own desires, she began seeking God's will for her relationship. Instead of submitting her frustration, she began submitting her future. Over the course of several weeks, Jessica's heart began to change. She realized that her desperation for marriage wasn't really about love. It was about security, social pressure, and fear of being alone. As she continued in this prayer practice, God began to heal those insecurities and fears. He began to show her areas of her own character that needed development before she would be ready for marriage. Interestingly, as Jessica's heart changed, her relationship dynamics changed as well. She became less demanding and more loving. She became less anxious and more peaceful. She became less focused on what she wanted and more focused on what God wanted. And in that atmosphere of peace and surrender, her boyfriend began to see qualities in her that made him want to commit to a lifetime together. 6 months later, they were engaged. But Jessica told me, "Pastor David, I'm grateful that God gave me the desire of my heart, but I'm even more grateful that He changed my heart about my desires." The woman who gets married is completely different from the woman who was demanding marriage. This prayer practice didn't just get me what I wanted, it made me into someone worthy of what I wanted. This is the miracle that happens when you understand prayer correctly. It's not about manipulating God to serve your agenda. It's about allowing God to transform your agenda to match His heart. It's not about getting God to want what you want. It's about learning to want what God wants. And here's the beautiful truth. What God wants for your life is always better than what you want for your life. His plans are always more fulfilling, more satisfying, more beneficial than your plans. His timing is always more perfect than your timing. His methods are always more effective than your methods. When you begin each day with this prayer, you're essentially saying, "God, I trust your heart for my life more than I trust my own understanding. I believe your love for me is so complete that you'll never lead me anywhere that isn't ultimately for my good. I surrender my agenda and embrace yours." This level of trust doesn't come naturally. It's developed through relationship, through experience, through consistently choosing to believe God's character, even when you can't understand God's methods. But as you practice this prayer daily, as you see God's faithfulness over and over again, your trust will deepen and your surrender will become more complete. I want to address something that might be concerning some of you as you think about implementing this practice. You might be worried that surrendering your desires to God means you'll have to give up everything you want and live a life of deprivation and sacrifice. You might fear that seeking God's will means accepting whatever comes your way without any input or preference. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of God's heart toward you. God is not a cosmic killjoy looking for ways to make your life miserable. He's not a harsh taskmaster who delights in denying your requests. He's a loving Father who wants to give you good gifts, who takes pleasure in your happiness, who desires to fulfill the dreams He's placed in your heart. The Bible tells us that God delights to give us the desires of our hearts. But here's the key. As we delight ourselves in Him, as we draw closer to His heart through daily prayer and communion, our desires begin to align with His desires. We begin to want what He wants. We begin to dream His dreams for our lives. This doesn't mean you become a spiritual robot without preferences or personality. It means your preferences become refined, your personality becomes sanctified, and your dreams become elevated. Instead of wanting things that are ultimately empty or harmful, you begin to desire things that are eternally significant and genuinely fulfilling. Think about the difference between a child's desires and an adult's desires. A child might want to eat candy for every meal, stay up all night and never go to school. An adult understands that balanced nutrition, adequate rest and education are actually better for long-term health and happiness. The adult's desires aren't less enjoyable, they're more mature and ultimately more satisfying. In the same way, as you grow in spiritual maturity through consistent prayer, your desires don't become less enjoyable. They become more aligned with what will actually bring lasting joy, peace, and fulfillment. You begin to want things that are not only good for you, but good through you to others. This transformation of desires is one of the most beautiful aspects of this prayer practice. You don't have to fight against your natural inclinations or suppress your God-given dreams. As you surrender, seek, submit, expect, and declare each morning, God begins to sanctify your desires, elevate your dreams, and refine your goals. Now let me share with you a practical tool that will help you maximize the effectiveness of this prayer practice. I call it the 5-finger prayer method, And it's a simple way to remember and organize your morning prayer time using the 5 components we've discussed. Your thumb, being the strongest finger, represents surrender. Just as your thumb provides strength and stability for your grip, surrender provides strength and stability for your spiritual life. Each morning, use your thumb to remind you to surrender everything that concerns you to God's capable hands. Your index finger, the pointer finger, represents seeking. Just as you use this finger to point and direct, seeking God's kingdom first directs your entire day toward divine purposes. Let your index finger remind you to seek God's will above your own will. Your middle finger, being the tallest, represents submission. Just as this finger stands above the others, God's authority should stand above all other authorities in your life. Use your middle finger to remind you to submit your plans, your timeline, and your methods to God's perfect wisdom. Your ring finger, traditionally associated with commitment and promises, represents expectation. Just as a wedding ring symbolizes faith in future promises, expectation is faith in God's future faithfulness. Let your ring finger remind you to expect God to work in your life today. Your pinky finger, though small, represents declaration. Just as small words can have great power, your declarations of God's promises can have tremendous impact on your spiritual atmosphere. Use your pinky to remind you to speak God's truth over your life and circumstances. This 5-finger method gives you a simple, memorable way to structure your prayer time. You can literally count on your fingers to make sure you've covered all 5 components. It's especially helpful when you're just starting this practice and trying to remember what to include in your morning prayer. But remember, this is a tool, not a rule. The goal is not to mechanically go through 5 steps, but to genuinely connect with God's heart. Some mornings you might spend more time on surrender because you're facing particularly challenging circumstances. Other mornings, you might focus more on seeking because you have important decisions to make. The structure is meant to guide you, not confine you. As we move toward the conclusion of our time together, I want to share with you one final story that perfectly captures the transformative power of this prayer practice. It's the story of an elderly woman named Margaret, who had been attending our church for over 40 years. Margaret had lived through more challenges than most people could imagine. She had buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children as a single mother for much of their childhood, battled cancer twice, lost her home in a fire, and faced financial hardship that would have broken most people's spirits. Despite all these trials, Margaret was one of the most joyful, peaceful, hopeful people I had ever met. Other church members would often comment on her positive attitude and unshakable faith. When I asked Margaret about the secret to her spiritual strength, she shared something that changed my understanding of prayer forever. Margaret told me, "Pastor David, people think I'm strong because I've survived so many difficult things. But the truth is, I'm not naturally strong at all. I'm actually quite weak and fearful by nature. The only reason I've been able to face these challenges with peace is because I learned many years ago to give each day to God before the day could overwhelm me." Margaret went on to explain that after her first husband died suddenly when she was just 32 years old, with 3 young children and another on the way, she felt completely overwhelmed and hopeless. She didn't know how she was going to raise 4 children alone, how she was going to pay the bills, or how she was going to emotionally survive the grief. "I remember lying in bed one morning about 3 months after the funeral," Margaret continued, "feeling like I couldn't get up, couldn't face another day, couldn't pretend to be strong for my children when I felt so broken inside. That's when I heard God speak to my heart, not audibly but clearly, and he said, 'Margaret, you don't have to be strong enough for a lifetime. You don't even have to be strong enough for a whole day. You just have to be strong enough for this moment, and I'll give you that strength one moment at a time.'" From that morning forward, Margaret established the practice of spending the first part of each day surrendering her fears, seeking God's strength, submitting her plans to his will, expecting his faithfulness, and declaring his promises over her life and her children. She told me that this wasn't always easy or natural, especially in the beginning when grief clouded her thinking and despair whispered lies about her future. But every morning that I chose to pray first, Margaret said, something shifted inside me. Not always dramatically, not always immediately, but consistently. It was like God was rewiring my heart one prayer at a time, one surrender at a time, one declaration at a time. Over the decades that followed, Margaret faced trial after trial, but she never again felt that crushing sense of hopelessness she experienced after her husband's death. She raised 4 successful, godly children who all remain active in ministry today. She built a successful catering business that provided for her family and employed dozens of people over the years. She remarried a wonderful man who loved her children as his own, and together they served in ministry for over 20 years before he too went home to be with the Lord. Pastor David, Margaret concluded, I don't know what my life would have looked like if I hadn't learned to pray first. I can't imagine trying to face all those challenges without starting each day connected to God's heart. That daily prayer time wasn't just a spiritual discipline for me. It was my lifeline, my strength, my source of hope when hope seemed impossible. Margaret's story illustrates something profound about this prayer practice. It's not just for people who are naturally spiritual or those who have their lives together. It's especially powerful for people who feel weak, overwhelmed, or uncertain about their ability to handle what life is throwing at them. The beauty of starting each day with God is that you don't have to muster up your own strength, wisdom, or courage. You simply have to show up in His presence and allow Him to fill you with what you need for that day. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to stay connected to the one who does. As I think about Margaret's testimony and the countless other lives I've seen transformed through this practice, I'm reminded of something Jesus said in Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This prayer practice is essentially accepting Jesus' invitation every single morning. You come to Him with your weariness, your burdens, your concerns, your fears. You take His yoke upon you by surrendering your agenda and accepting His. You learn from Him by seeking His wisdom and submitting to His ways, and in return, you find rest for your soul and strength for your day. The yoke Jesus offers is easy, not because it requires no effort, but because it's perfectly fitted to who you are and what you're called to do. The burden is light, not because there are no responsibilities, but because you're carrying them in partnership with Him rather than in your own strength alone. This is what happens when you make this prayer your daily practice. Life doesn't become challenge-free, but challenges become manageable. Circumstances don't always change immediately, but your capacity to handle circumstances is transformed. Problems don't disappear, but your perspective on problems is elevated. You begin to approach each day not as someone who has to figure everything out, but as someone who is partnered with infinite wisdom. You wake up not wondering if you can handle what's coming, but knowing that the one who holds your future has already prepared you for whatever this day holds. I want to share something with you that most people never realize about consistent prayer. It creates what I call spiritual momentum. Just like physical momentum makes it easier to keep moving forward, spiritual momentum makes it easier to live in faith, hope, and victory. But just like physical momentum, it takes consistent energy to build and maintain. When you pray sporadically, when you only turn to God during crisis moments, when you treat prayer like a last resort instead of a first response, you're starting from zero every time. You have to rebuild spiritual momentum with each prayer, rediscover God's faithfulness with each request, reestablish trust with each conversation. But when you pray consistently, when you make this practice your daily foundation, when you choose connection with God before anything else every single morning, you build spiritual momentum that carries you through difficulties, elevates you above circumstances, and positions you for breakthrough even before breakthrough is needed. Think about a train leaving the station. Initially, it takes enormous energy to get those massive wheels turning, to overcome inertia, to begin forward movement. But once the train builds momentum, it can pull incredible loads at remarkable speeds with much less effort. The consistent application of power early on creates momentum that makes everything else possible. This is exactly what happens in your spiritual life when you establish this prayer practice. The first few weeks might feel like you're pushing against enormous resistance. Your mind will wander, your schedule will be disrupted, the enemy will throw every distraction possible at you. But if you persist, if you keep applying spiritual energy through consistent prayer, momentum begins to build. After a month of consistency, you'll notice that prayer feels more natural, more necessary, more powerful. After 3 months, you'll wonder how you ever tried to live without this practice. After a year, this time with God will become so essential to your well-being that missing it will feel like trying to function without breathing. I remember talking to a businessman named Thomas who had been practicing this prayer routine for over 2 years. He told me something that perfectly captures this concept of spiritual momentum. He said, "Pastor David, I used to think I was too busy to pray. Now I realize I'm too busy not to pray. Those 20 minutes with God each morning don't slow me down, they speed me up. They don't drain my energy, they multiply it. They don't complicate my day, they simplify it." Thomas went on to explain that before establishing this practice, he would spend hours each day worrying about decisions, second-guessing himself, trying to control outcomes, and managing anxiety. "But now," he said, "I make decisions from a place of peace, because I've already surrendered the day to God. I don't waste energy on worry because I've already submitted my concerns to His care. I don't try to control everything because I've already acknowledged that He's in control." This is the practical benefit of spiritual momentum, beloved. When you consistently start your day connected to God's heart, aligned with His purposes, and anchored in His promises, you operate from a position of spiritual strength rather than spiritual weakness. You respond to life from a foundation of faith rather than fear. But let me tell you what spiritual momentum also creates. It makes you dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. When you're consistently connected to heaven's power, when you're daily downloading divine wisdom, when you're regularly receiving supernatural strength, you become a threat to every force that opposes God's purposes in the earth. The enemy doesn't mind believers who pray occasionally, sporadically, desperately. Those prayers, while still heard by God, don't create the kind of sustained spiritual authority that can shift atmospheres, change circumstances, and advance God's kingdom. But consistent prayer, daily communion, sustained connection with heaven, that creates the kind of spiritual momentum that demons flee from and angels rally around. This is why the enemy will fight against your commitment to this practice more than almost anything else. He'll make you oversleep. He'll create emergencies that seem urgent but aren't important. He'll whisper that you're too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed to pray. He'll remind you of every other thing you could be doing with those 15 or 20 minutes. But here's what I want you to remember when that resistance comes. The level of opposition you face is often proportional to the level of breakthrough you're approaching. The enemy doesn't waste ammunition on activities that don't threaten his kingdom. If he's fighting hard against your prayer life, it's because he knows what consistent prayer will produce in your life. Every morning that you choose prayer over the snooze button, you're winning a spiritual battle. Every morning that you seek God before checking your phone, you're establishing divine priorities. Every morning that you surrender your agenda and embrace His, you're positioning yourself for supernatural intervention. Now, Let me share with you something that will help you understand why this practice is so transformative. There's a principle in Scripture that most people overlook, but once you grasp it, it will revolutionize your understanding of how God works in your life. In Matthew 6:21, Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Most people think this verse is only about money, but it's actually about much more than finances. It's about the principle of investment creating affection. Whatever you consistently invest your time, energy, and attention in becomes more valuable to you. When you invest the first part of every day in prayer, when you treasure those moments with God above everything else that's competing for your attention, your heart becomes more and more aligned with His heart. When you prioritize communion with Him over communication with everyone else, your affections become more heavenly and less worldly. This is why people who maintain consistent prayer lives often seem different from other believers. They're not necessarily more naturally spiritual or more gifted or more favored. They've simply invested so much treasure in their relationship with God that their hearts have been drawn toward His heart. I think about Mary and Martha in the Bible. Both sisters loved Jesus, both welcomed Him into their home, both wanted to serve Him and honor Him. But Mary understood something that Martha missed. The most valuable thing she could do with her time, when Jesus was present, was to invest it in listening to Him, learning from Him, and loving Him. Martha was busy with good things, preparing food, cleaning the house, making sure everything was perfect for their honored guest. But Mary chose the better thing, sitting at Jesus' feet, treasuring His words, investing her attention in their relationship. When Martha complained that Mary wasn't helping with the preparations, Jesus gently corrected her perspective. He essentially said, "Martha, you're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Now, this is the choice you face every morning, beloved. You can be like Martha, immediately rushing into the busyness of preparation, the anxiety of responsibility, the overwhelm of everything that needs to be done. Or you can be like Mary, choosing to sit at Jesus' feet first, to invest your treasure in relationship with Him, to prioritize connection over productivity. When you choose the Mary approach, when you consistently invest the treasure of your morning time in prayer, something beautiful happens. Your heart becomes so aligned with God's heart that His priorities become your priorities. His peace becomes your peace. His strength becomes your strength. His wisdom becomes your wisdom. But here's what's even more remarkable. When your heart is aligned with God's heart through consistent prayer, you actually become more effective in all the Martha activities of life. You make better decisions because you're connected to divine wisdom. You handle stress better because you're anchored in divine peace. You accomplish more because you're empowered by divine strength. This is the paradox of kingdom living. When you seek first God's kingdom, everything else gets added to you. When you prioritize prayer over productivity, you become more productive. When you invest time in relationship with God, you find more time for everything else. I remember counseling a single mother named Lisa, who was overwhelmed by the demands of raising 3 young children while working full-time and going to school part-time. She told me, "Pastor David, I know I should pray more, but I barely have time to sleep, let alone pray. Between work, school, homework, cooking, cleaning, and trying to be a good mother, there just aren't enough hours in the day." I understood Lisa's situation, but I challenged her with this question. "Lisa, what if I told you that 20 minutes of prayer each morning would actually create more time in your day, not less? What if those 20 minutes with God would give you wisdom to be more efficient, peace to be less stressed, and energy to be more productive?" Lisa was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. She committed to waking up just 20 minutes earlier each morning to pray through surrender, seeking, submission, expectation, and declaration. She expected it to be difficult, draining, and probably ineffective. What happened over the next month surprised Lisa completely. She told me, "Pastor, I don't understand how this is possible, but I'm actually getting more done in less time. I'm making better decisions about how to prioritize my day. I'm less stressed, so I'm not wasting energy on worry and anxiety. I'm more patient with my children, so we're not having as many behavioral issues. I'm sleeping better at night because I'm not lying awake planning and worrying." But the most remarkable change, Lisa said, was in her perspective. "I used to wake up every morning feeling like I was already behind, like I was fighting an uphill battle against an impossible schedule. Now I wake up feeling like I have a partner in managing my life. I'm not carrying everything alone anymore." This is what happens when you understand the true mathematics of prayer, beloved. The time you invest in communion with God doesn't subtract from your available time. It multiplies your effective time. The energy you spend in prayer doesn't drain your resources. It replenishes and increases your capacity. When you're connected to the source of all wisdom, you make fewer mistakes that require time to fix. When you're anchored in divine peace, you don't waste energy on anxiety and stress. When you're empowered by supernatural strength, you can accomplish more than you ever could in your own ability. But beyond the practical benefits, there's something even more valuable that happens through this daily practice. You develop what I call spiritual sensitivity. You become more aware of God's presence throughout your day, more attuned to His voice in the midst of noise, more sensitive to His leading in the midst of confusion. Most believers live with what I call spiritual static. They know God is there. They believe He loves them. They trust that He's working in their lives, but they struggle to sense His presence, hear His voice, or recognize His movement. It's like trying to tune in to a radio station with poor reception. You know the signal is there, but it's fuzzy, unclear, interrupted by interference. Consistent morning prayer is like adjusting the antenna and fine-tuning the frequency. The more consistently you connect with God's heart at the beginning of each day, the clearer His signal becomes throughout the day. You begin to recognize His voice in the midst of other voices. You start to sense His presence in ordinary moments. You become aware of His guidance in everyday decisions. This spiritual sensitivity is one of the most precious gifts of a consistent prayer life. It's the difference between living like an orphan who hopes God cares about their life and living like a beloved child who knows their father is intimately involved in every detail of their existence. When you develop this sensitivity through daily prayer, you begin to see God's fingerprints everywhere. You recognize His provision in unexpected places. You sense His protection in potentially dangerous situations. You feel His comfort in seasons of sorrow. You experience His guidance in moments of uncertainty. I think about Moses, who spent so much time in God's presence that his face literally glowed with divine radiance. The Bible tells us that Moses spoke with God face to face, as a man speaks with his friend. This wasn't a one-time experience. It was the result of consistent, intimate communion with the Almighty. But here's what's remarkable. The same God who spoke with Moses face to face wants to speak with you heart to heart. The same presence that transformed Moses' countenance wants to transform your character. The same intimacy that Moses experienced with God is available to you through consistent prayer. You may not see a physical glow when you look in the mirror after prayer, but people will notice something different about you. There will be a peace in your demeanor that can't be manufactured. There will be a confidence in your step that doesn't come from circumstances. There will be a joy in your spirit that transcends your situation. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through sporadic prayer. It happens through the daily discipline of seeking God's face, surrendering to His will, and aligning your heart with His heart. It happens through the consistent choice to prioritize relationship with Him over everything else that competes for your attention. As we prepare to conclude our time together, I want to leave you with a challenge that could change the trajectory of your entire life. For the next 40 days, not 30, but 40, the biblical number of testing and transformation. I want you to commit to this prayer practice without exception. 40 days of waking up 15 to 20 minutes earlier than usual. 40 days of starting with surrender, seeking, submission, expectation, and declaration. 40 days of choosing prayer over the snooze button, communion over communication, God's agenda over your anxiety. I'm not asking you to commit to this for the rest of your life. That might feel overwhelming. I'm just asking you to commit to 40 days. Give God 40 days to show you what this practice can do in your life. Give yourself 40 days to develop the spiritual momentum that could change everything. Keep a journal during these 40 days. Write down what you pray for, what you surrender, what you expect, what you declare. Note the changes in your perspective, your peace level, your decision-making, your relationships, your circumstances. Document the ways you sense God's presence, hear His voice, or recognize His movement. At the end of 40 days, evaluate the impact this practice has had on your life. If you don't see any difference, if you don't experience any transformation, if you don't sense any greater connection with God, then you can go back to your old routine with confidence that you gave it a fair try. But I'm convinced that if you commit to this practice for 40 days, you'll never want to go back to living without it. I believe you'll discover that this isn't just a spiritual discipline, but a spiritual lifeline. I believe you'll find that these minutes with God become the most important, most valuable, most transformative minutes of your entire day. The question isn't whether this practice works. I've seen it work in thousands of lives over 2 decades of ministry. The question is whether you'll work this practice. Will you set your alarm 20 minutes earlier tomorrow morning? Will you create a quiet space where you can meet with God? Will you choose to surrender, seek, submit, expect, and declare before you do anything else? Your breakthrough is waiting for this decision. Your transformation is waiting for this commitment. Your destiny is waiting for this prayer. Everything can shift, starting tomorrow morning, if you'll just remember to always pray first. The enemy has convinced too many believers that they don't have time for prayer, that they're too busy for daily communion with God, that they can handle life's challenges without consistent divine connection. But what if the opposite is true? What if you don't have time not to pray? What if you're too busy not to seek God first? What if you can't afford to face another day without this divine alignment? Tomorrow morning, when your alarm goes off, you'll have a choice. You can hit the snooze button and start another day the same way you've started every other day, or you can get up and start the day that could change everything. You can rush into the chaos of your schedule, or you can enter into the peace of God's presence first. The choice is yours, beloved. But remember this: your life is too valuable, your calling too important, your destiny too significant to leave to chance. You were created for more than survival. You were created for victory. You were designed for more than getting by. You were designed for breakthrough. You were called to more than ordinary living. You were called to supernatural living. And supernatural living begins with supernatural communion. It starts with always praying first. The choice that awaits you tomorrow morning isn't just about 20 minutes of your time. It's about the trajectory of your entire existence. It's about whether you'll continue to live beneath your spiritual inheritance or finally step into the abundance that God has prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I want you to imagine something with me. Picture yourself 1 year from today, looking back on this moment, this decision, this commitment to always pray first. Imagine the testimonies you'll have to share about God's faithfulness, the breakthroughs you'll have witnessed, the peace you'll have experienced even in the midst of storms. Imagine the relationships that will have been healed, the doors that will have opened, the provision that will have come, the guidance that will have been given. Now imagine the alternative. Picture yourself a year from now, still struggling with the same anxieties, still wrestling with the same problems, still feeling overwhelmed by the same circumstances, still wondering why other believers seem to have something you're missing. The difference between these two futures isn't your circumstances, your background, or your natural abilities. The difference is this one decision to make prayer your first priority every single morning. Beloved, I'm not just teaching you about prayer. I'm offering you a key that unlocks the supernatural life that Jesus died to give you. I'm sharing with you the secret that transforms ordinary believers into extraordinary witnesses. I'm revealing the practice that turns survivors into overcomers, victims into victors, the defeated into the triumphant. But this key will remain useless unless you pick it up and use it. This secret will remain powerless unless you apply it. This practice will remain ineffective unless you commit to it. The knowledge you've received today is valuable, but knowledge without application is worthless. James tells us to be doers of the word, not hearers only. You've heard the word today about the power of praying first. Now the question is, will you be a doer? Will you take what you've learned and transform it from information into transformation? Will you move from knowing about this practice to living this practice? I believe you will. I believe that God has orchestrated this moment, this message, this revelation for such a time as this in your life. I believe that you're not here by accident, but by divine appointment. I believe that heaven is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do with what you now know. The angels are ready to be dispatched on your behalf. The Holy Spirit is ready to empower your prayers. The Father is ready to respond to your surrender. Jesus is ready to intercede with you and for you. All of heaven is positioned to move when you make the commitment to always pray first. But the decision is yours, and the time to make it is now. Not tomorrow when you feel more ready, not next week when your schedule calms down, not next month when things get better. Now, today, this moment, your life is waiting, your breakthrough is waiting, your destiny is waiting, and they're all waiting for one simple decision. Will you always pray first? The choice is yours, beloved. But remember, you were never meant to carry life's burdens alone. You were never designed to figure everything out in your own wisdom. You were never created to face tomorrow's challenges with only today's strength. Always pray first. Let this be your declaration, your commitment, your new way of life. Always pray first, and watch as everything in your life begins to shift into divine alignment, supernatural provision, and eternal significance. The prayer that can shift everything in your life is waiting for you tomorrow morning. The question is, will you be there to pray it?